おお、本物だ。
Nice to meet you.
Wow,
We are really glad to see you.
So Wild Turkey actually got its name through a company called Austin Nichols.
You're going to get more of those barrel characteristics, and you're going to develop more flavors.
So sweetness up front, spiciness back.
ミーの質問は結構マニアック。はい。
We only have one yeast strain at Wild Turkey that's been around over 100 years.
皆さんこんばんは、静谷園でございます。
いや、したね、俺が何回やる。ちょっと待ってください。
中途半端なツッコミで。前半でですね、はい、ちゃんぽんちからさんの動画でいろいろとインタビューをしてきたんですけれども、後半戦静谷さんに深掘りをワイルドターキーをしていただきたいと思います。
ミーの質問は結構マニアックです。はい、どうぞよろしくお願いします。まずケンタッキーバーボンウイスキーって僕のイメージだとライムストーンウォーターっていうのを使用されていると思うんですね。そちらの貯水池を教えていただきたいんですけども、どういったところで採取されているのかなっていうのを。はい。
So the Kentucky River is the reason all the bourbon distilleries are right around central Kentucky because the water. Limestone water takes out hard metals like irons that leave a bad taste. So it's a mineral rich, but it's a sweet water. So you don't have those hard metals in there. So we sit right above it on a cliff, right above the river, to get all that water to make our mashes and make our bourbons.
酵母に関しましては、バーボンウイスキーとライウイスキーと変えてらっしゃるんですかね。
We do not. We only have one yeast strain at Wild Turkey that's been around over 100 years. We use the same for both.
歴史ある工房だと思うんですけれども、どのように保管ってされてるんですか？
Yes, so you can put yeast under cold temperatures and keep it from changing. When I was a kid, it used to be kept on site at the distillery, and then my grandfather actually kept some at his home in his deep freeze. Now, when Campari purchased this, they don't allow us to do that anymore, so it's now kept off-site in a place called White Labs in California. So if anything ever happens to our yeast at our distillery, they can send us a pure sample.
But Jimmy still has some in his refrigerator.
貴重な情報をありがとうございます。ラッセル家と同じように酵母も引き継がれてきているっていうことですね。
Yes, it definitely is because it's going to determine flavors, it's going to determine your fermentation, all sorts of things. So if you change, you're going to change the flavor of your bourbon.
For Jimmy, the yeast is one of the most important parts of the process. So he likes to keep that a secret. For me and Dad both, I think once Jimmy thought that we were really ready to start making whiskey, that is when he taught us how to do the yeast ourselves.
酵母もその材料の大切な要素の一つとして数えてらっしゃるっていうことですよね。
Yes, the yeast is very important. I mean, the whole process is, but that's the beginning, so you have to make sure that's very good.
ケンタッキーバーボンではよく沢増し方式という方法が取られていると思うんですけども、バックセットはクッカーとまたはハーメンターどちらに入れてらっしゃるのか、またはどっちにも入れてらっしゃるのか、またどれぐらいの量を入れられるのかっていうのを。
We actually add backset to 3 parts of the process. So we put backset into our cooks, we put backset actually into our yeast tubs, and we put backset into our fermentation. What your backset's going to do is it's going to make the pH balance right for either your enzymes of your malt to work, your yeast to work correctly, and your yeast mashes your fermentation. So that backset's very important for us to keep out outside bacteria.
バックセットもある種のその受け継がれてきてた素材のような永続してずっと使われるエレメンツのうちの一つみたいな。
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because what you're doing is taking a little bit of what you run through your still yesterday and take the alcohol away. What's left over, we use it to start the batch on the next day. So it keeps everything consistent. So you keep your flavors consistent, you keep your yeast consistent. Not everybody does the sire on their yeast. But Jimmy just likes to do all the process so everything stays the same as it goes through.
どれぐらい酸っぱいんですか？バクセットってレモンと比べてどうですかね？
So it's a more acidity. I mean, you're not really sour, but what you're doing is trying to keep that back set, the pH level, and the acidity to keep other bacteria, because yeast is a bacteria. If you don't keep that in there, then it's very hard to keep other bacteria getting in there. Then that would change your yeast altogether.
いやー、一回舐めてみたいよね。バクセットって舐めたことがないから、その上流廃液って言われるねもので。
You definitely don't want to try backset.
小川さんがね、2人をケンタッキー市に連れてってくれたら舐めれるチャンスがあるかもしれないけども。
ありがとうございます。
ネクストイヤーで。
Next year. Next year. I want to go to your distillery. Next year. ワイルドターキー蒸留所は熟成庫のスタイルがまずレンガ式と木造式とあると思うんですね。棚も7段ほどあるっていう風に聞いたことがあるんですけども、それぞれのエンジェルシェア、まあ蒸散率って言ったらいいんですかね。でどれぐらいなのかなっていう風に。
So we really only have traditional rick houses, is what we would call them, where they're wood on the inside and then metal clad on the outside. We don't use any brick warehouses at Wild Turkey. On average, we're losing about 5% a year to angel share, but that's going to change quite a bit. On your bottom floors, you lose very little. Only a couple percent a year, and on your top floors, you could lose almost up to 10% a year, depending on where the warehouse is located.
On average, 10 years, you lose 50%.
50%。ケンタッキー州って特に夏と冬の寒暖差が激しいと思うんですけど、管理の仕方、特にこだわってることっていうのがあれば。
So we don't. We want it to be completely natural. When it gets very hot, the whiskey gets into the wood, picking up those flavors and colors. In the winter, when it comes out, it sort of rests where they can marry together. So it's perfect to have hot temperatures and then have cold temperatures, because that barrel's sitting there breathing, the whiskey's moving in and out of that wood to bring all these great flavors and 100% of the color.
ワイルドターキー蒸留所2010年に大きなリニューアル工事をされていると思うんですけども、旧蒸留所と変わった点っていうのは？
We actually do have a few plans to make a change or two at the location. So since 2010, we actually automated our distillery for the first time. So it's allowed us to produce much more whiskey and much more consistent whiskey. We haven't really changed the recipe, we haven't changed our yeast strain, we haven't changed the way we make it, but it's allowed us to make a more consistent product. We actually are building a brand new distillery at the end of 20 and 25 right next to the current one, which will allow us to make a little over 20 million more proof liters a year.
まあせっかくなんで12年がございますので、12年の味わいもお二人からちょっとお聞きできたらなと思うんで。
This is my favorite product available in Japan. We don't have the 12-year-old back home.
そう。逆にアメリカ限定の年数のものってレンジのものってあるんですか？
My favorite thing that's currently only available in the United States is rare breed rye. So it's like the rare breed bourbon. It's a blend of 3 ages and barrel proof, but it's rye whiskey, and I love rye whiskey, so it's probably my favorite thing only available in the US.
なんかたまらず2人先に飲んじゃってますけど。
先にちょっとフライングしてしまって
飲んじゃってますけど。
美味しいですね。
うまいね。すごいスイートで。
せっかくなんでブルースさんが12年お好きだということで。
So the 12-year-old being, 4 years older than the 8, I think what you get is a deeper, richer, more mature whiskey. And so instead of the honeys, vanillas, and the caramel, I think you can pick up some toffee, more of a dark caramel or a brown sugar on this one. I think you pick up a lot more barrel characteristics like oak and char. You're still going to get the Wild Turkey spice, that cinnamon and black pepper, but the finish is even longer than the 8-year. It's kind of the grown-up version. It's why it's my favorite.
ちょっとなんかオレオみたいなのを僕感じます。
ああ。
Oh, yeah.
オレオにしか感じなくなってきた。確かに。
With our older whiskey specifically, usually 12 and older, chocolate is a note that we use a lot in our distillery.
50% 感じないですね。スムース。
Oh, yeah.
ウイスキー飲み始めの方とかって度数が高いっていうところにちょっとだけ懸念をするんですね。あえてその 50.5 度であったりとかっていうその中で美味しさとかっていうところをお伝えできたらいいなと思うんですけれども。
Well, for me, every time I'm asked this question, I always say, go to your local bar, ask the bartender for a bourbon cocktail. And then he's going to start telling you what bourbon's in there, what he thinks about it. And then each time you go, try a different bourbon. And you'll see which ones you like, whether you like the lower proof, the higher proof, the older whiskeys. So for me, it's always when somebody says, how do I get started? Go to your local bar. That bartender knows plenty about bourbon.
来年3人で行って
お、
地元のバーで皆さんがどのように飲まれてるかだったりとかっていうところもぜひ楽しみに行きたいなと。
いやマジで
そうですね、
はい、
地元のバーでターキーカクテルをしばかないことには始まらないですね。やっぱりもう気がついたらもうみんなグラスがもうエンプティーになってますね。もう美味しすぎてなんかはい。
If you all come to Kentucky next year, I'll take you out into the bars.
ああ、Thank you
それでは最後ちょっと乾杯で締めくくって、
はい
本日の会を終わらせていただきたいと思います。
エリーさん、ブルーさん、ありがとうございます。そしたら乾杯。せーの、馬谷園。
バイバイ。
バイバイ。See you next time.